Paymon who?
Matahede.
Paymon Latahede. Who is he?
Never paid taxes in 30 years. Fought the U.S. tax court and won.
See, I believe our rights come from God, not from government.
Hello to my truth and freedom-seeking friends. I'm Paymon Latahede, president of Freedom Law School. Tonight, I'm going to cover with you part 3 of the former gun-carrying special agent with the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS, Joseph Banister, who defected from the dark side of the IRS and the deep state, the DOJ, to the side of we the people, the American people, you and I, and freedom for you and the American people. Folks, if you've not seen the first 2 parts, watch those, okay? The first part basically covered Joe how he came to come across the tax truth freedom movement up to resignation, and then part 2 covers basically from that point forward until now, when he was trying to get the government to answer questions for Joe, confront them. Look, you got to tell American people the truth. Let's come and talk about this in a civil, calm manner like we're supposed to do, not violence. And then part 3 now, the government tries to silence Joe. And so, Joe, you want to tell us how they tried to silence you back in 2004?
I worked for the IRS for almost 5.5 years and expected to spend a full 20-year career with the IRS. But it was cut short because I began to investigate the actual authority and boundaries of the income tax system, prompted by first listening to a radio talk show out in the San Francisco Bay Area. So at the point of really having to fish or cut bait, I presented my IRS supervisors with my concerns. I pointed out that I had taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Pointed out, of course, that all of us, including my IRS supervisors, had taken the same oath. We were governed by the same Treasury rules of conduct, and we really had a duty to, get to the bottom of these claims about the federal income tax, whether or not the average American was required to pay it. So, as has been discussed with you in previous editions, I was rebuffed. I didn't care about my concerns or anything, didn't want to answer any of my questions. And so I resigned in February of 1999. And so from during 1999, 2000, 2001, and 2002, I continued to, whenever I was asked to be interviewed, whether it be a mainstream media news organ or, alternative, whatever it might be, I would accept the invitation. And there was media attention in the mainstream that, people have probably heard of, such as the New York Times, CNBC, which is where Maria Bartiromo was at the time, MSNBC, and, various news organs. And so I imagine that this, my activity of trying to tell my story caught the attention of the IRS and the DOJ, and they weren't happy with me telling my story. So apparently they were looking for any way to, discredit me. Actually, one of the reasons that I left the IRS was to avoid the discrediting type conduct that typically the government engages in. So, the more that they can discredit someone, the less that people might believe them. Mm-hmm. So I learned in 2001, about 2 years after I left the IRS, that I was under criminal investigation. So basically the same agents that I used to work for and with were investigating me now as a private citizen, an ex-IRS employee. And I thought to myself, having done the job for 5 years, this must be a scare tactic. I have not done anything criminal. This is crazy. What could they possibly create for me to have done, because I didn't, I knew that I hadn't engaged in any criminal conduct. So in November of 2004, I was indicted on 4 felonies. And I learned about it because the IRS special agents, a couple of them, came to arrest me I was actually living in San Jose, California at the time. Of course, that was the city that I was born and raised in. And I was in the morning, and my wife had already left with the two kids to take them to elementary school. And I hear some knocking at the door, and so I look out the window, and I see a San Jose, California police car. And I thought to myself, well, maybe my brother Jeff is coming to visit me, because he sometimes would do that. And then I looked a little more into the window and saw a second San Jose police car, and I thought to myself, well, my brother Jeff never brings any friends with him. And about that same time, I heard the front door of the house open, and someone began calling out my name and basically telling me that they had a warrant for my arrest. So I basically gave up, peacefully. And so often I'd be treated as the citizen, the taxpayer, whatever you want to call it, the target of the investigation, because in my cubicle, it was pretty well known in my IRS office that I was the Constitution guy. So even though, I worked every day as an IRS special agent from 93 through 99, I had bumper stickers in my cubicle that were, pro-Constitution, pro-Second Amendment, anti-tyranny. And so, it was kind of my reputation in the office. So when it came time where I was actually arrested myself, I just kind of had the mindset of another training exercise and, gave up peacefully and, was quite surprised, of course, that I was being arrested because, as I said, I knew I was under criminal investigation, but I couldn't imagine what the government could come up with, but I was soon to find out. So I was taken from San Jose, California to Sacramento, California, to the U.S. Marshal's office, basically to be booked, to be photographed, fingerprints taken, and the typical booking that happens from the feds when you're arrested. And then I learned what the charges were against me, that I was charged with 4 felonies. One of the felonies was conspiracy to defraud the United States of America. And then I was also charged with having prepared 3 false federal income tax returns. So, typically when you've been arrested, one of the things you'd like to do is make bail. And also typically, the prosecutor may not want you to make bail and make things more difficult for you. And that was the case in my situation. The prosecutor wanted me to remain in custody, and I obviously wanted to get out of custody. And so I ended up being in the U.S. Marshal's lockup for maybe 3 or 4 hours, maybe not including the travel from San Jose to Sacramento, about 2 hours each way. And I was booked, photographed, and then placed into a cell. And then within, a couple hours, I was given a hearing. And that was basically a custody hearing. Will they keep me or not? Interestingly, the U.S. Marshals had told me, we're not sure if you're going to be staying with us or not, but if you stay with us, we're going to be putting you in the Sacramento County Jail. Basically 2 choices. We can put you in the general population, or we can put you with the sexual predators. So I wasn't really thrilled with either of those choices, but I went ahead and, I told them, I guess put me with the sexual predators. Maybe I have a better chance of surviving than the general population. But thankfully, I didn't have to, go down that road because I was released on a recognizance bond where I just simply signed a promise to appear in court and pay, I think it was $25,000 or $30,000 if I didn't show up in court. And I was released. So that was in November of 2004, approximately 5 years after I'd left the IRS. And interestingly, I had already not filed a federal income tax return in 1999, 2000, 01, 02, 03, and 04. Yet when I was indicted in 2004, I was charged with this, alleged conduct that I allegedly engaged with a client, but not my personal circumstances relating to, having not filed a tax return. So, of course, when you've been accused of such things, you, I guess, can just give in or you can defend yourself. And of course, this was all new to me because I never thought in a million years that the IRS would actually follow through with this. But, we all know, or you and I are very well familiar with how the IRS really, has a need to discredit those that would expose what they're really up to. And so that was obviously their main goal. So I had about 7 months to prepare for my ultimate trial, which occurred in June of 2005. And interestingly, when the trial was about to begin, the Department of Justice filed a motion to get rid of one half of my defense team. My two attorneys were Jeffrey Dickstein and Robert Bernhoft, and the Department of Justice filed a motion with the court to have Robert Bernhoft removed from my defense team. And the DOJ claimed that that was for my own benefit, if you couldn't believe it. So thankfully, we opposed that motion, and it was denied. And I was able to keep the defense team that I had chosen, to represent me. This situation very well.
So let me ask you about this before. So the government claimed that they want the court to remove your lawyer to defend you because he's not a good lawyer and could end up hurting you. That's the excuse to get rid of him. That's what they said, basically.
Yes.
I mean, that just sounds crazy on its face. That, you choose a lawyer that you like, and they say, oh, no, he's not a good lawyer. Give him another guy, How about Jeff Dickstein? What was their excuse to want to get rid of Jeffrey Dickstein from representing you, Joe?
Actually, they only tried to get Bernhoft off.
I see.
They didn't try to get Dickstein off.
And Robert Barnes was also part of the team that worked in helping in your case? Attorney Warner Barnes.
He was working at the firm at the time. I don't really recall. I don't think he ever appeared in court that I recall.
But behind the scenes, I understand he wrote something, did some legal work for you guys through Robert Barnes, right? The constitutional lawyer. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Please continue, huh?
So I had this 7-month period to prepare. Of course, I would typically over-prepare for exams. I might tend to cram for my exams in college and high school, but I would certainly, over-prepare just in case. And, I wouldn't wish this kind of a battle on anyone because, I saw myself to be, absolutely innocent of these charges, and maybe I'll explain a little bit more. So the government, the DOJ, charged me with conspiracy in that the government claimed that I conspired with one of my clients, Al Thompson, to defraud the United States. And then the government also charged me with having prepared for Al Thompson as a CPA 3 false federal income tax returns. Now, the background is that Al Thompson had approached me and said, Joe, I determined that this income tax is a scam, and I've been filing and paying, for decades. And I'd like to get some of my money back, as much as I can possibly get back. And I'd like you as a CPA to help me follow the rules in order to try to get my money back. And so, pretty naively, I thought to myself, well, what could be wrong with a CPA helping his client to follow the IRS rules and seek a refund? I mean, people do it all the time. So the first step in filing a refund claim is to file an amended tax return. Now, there may be other ways to file refund claims, but in terms of the the circumstances I'm describing, the first step was to actually prepare an amended tax return. So to amend or revise the information that Al Thompson put on his original tax returns when he originally filed them. And so, that's the first step. So we followed that step, and in the tax returns, I was very careful to put only truthful and relevant information, including regulations, federal tax regulations, federal tax statutes, court cases, anything that might be relevant to the request for a refund. And I naively thought that, the purpose is for us to request a refund, and then the IRS can simply say, no, we're not going to give you the refund. And then there's an appeals process that you follow to iron out whether or not the client deserves the money or not. And so that's the way it's supposed to work. But the IRS and the DOJ turned those 3 tax returns that I prepared into what they called false refund claims, that I basically defrauded the government with the client by preparing these false tax returns, they claimed, as a CPA. So those were the 3 charges of the 4, me as a CPA preparing 3 tax returns. And then the 4th charge was an overriding conspiracy that I conspired with the client to defraud the United States of America. So those were the charges that I faced in June of 2005. And it was in Sacramento, California. And I had a jury trial. You can request a bench trial or a jury trial. And I requested a jury trial. I was a bit concerned because the case was handled in Sacramento, California, which for people outside of California may not know, but that's the capital of California. And so it's a beehive full of government workers. And, typically government workers aren't very, should we say, open-minded to hear that the, taxation there might be a problem with it, and they might have kind of a one-track mind. And anyway, there was some concern there. And some of the jurors ended up being government workers. And actually those jurors ended up being the strongest, having the most open minds, and ended up being my strongest advocate. So you really can't judge a book by its cover, is one of the lessons that I learned. Anyway, the trial lasted a little over a week, and as you know, because you went to every day of the trial, you observed the trial, you took notes, you were very, very much keeping an eye on things. Of course, I was busy defending myself, and so I was very grateful to you and others who, took a great deal of time out of your own lives to stand there with me and make sure that, the government dirty tricks were exposed. So I'm really grateful for that.
Well, you're welcome. In fact, we try to actually do some fundraising for you. Unfortunately, we had students, the Freedom Law School supporters, people that came to our freedom rallies, that when we called, that said, hey, Joe's under attack by the criminals in the U.S. government, let's help him out. And we were able to raise some funds to do that, because these lawsuits, these kind of cases are expensive. Attorney work is not cheap. You spend a lot of your money defending yourself, and then we were able to raise some funds. Other people do too. So that's what the way they try to do, is try to break you, and financial as well as, silence you. So, but anyhow, continue, please, Joe.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because, I was thinking more of the, in person, being there, which was very consoling and helpful. But indeed, you put out the word, and people came through. And, we're talking about 2005 value of $1 of a Federal Reserve note, and it cost over $200,000 to defend myself. And I didn't have to pay any of my own money, but I did have to take, basically 7 months of my life and devote it towards defending myself as opposed to working, and providing for my family. So, your fundraising efforts on my behalf were also, I'm very grateful for that as well.
And Bob Schultz did a lot too of We the People Foundation, and he was very much involved in supporting you, raising funds as well for you.
Yes, and significant, portions were due to you and Bob. So, eternally grateful for that. Anyway, the trial lasted for a little over a week. Some of the highlights, I guess we could say. Now, as I described, the government claimed that I prepared as a CPA 3 false federal income tax returns, and so my defense attorneys cross-examined the government's experts. The government put on an expert, a person that claimed to be an expert, basically a 25 to 30-year veteran IRS auditor, got up on the witness stand for the prosecution, and his job was to show how horribly fraudulent these tax returns were that I prepared. And so people know enough about trials. The government puts on their witness on direct examination, and then the defense, my side, gets to cross-examine the government witness. So the government witness is there to tell the jury how horribly fraudulent these tax returns were. And my side was very confident that, in fact, there was not a single, period, comma, sentence, paragraph, or page that was false or fraudulent about the tax return. And so Jeffrey Dickstein walked, or, basically took the IRS agent through the pages of the copies of the tax returns that the government claimed were fraudulent, and would say, like, well, let's look at paragraph 6, let's look at page 7, let's look at this sentence here, let's look at this box and this line item, and basically walked the IRS expert through the entire tax return and all 3 of those tax returns, and asked the expert to point out any false or fraudulent entries. And the IRS expert could not point to a single false or fraudulent entry. So, of course, the jury, as I later learned, is, scratching their head like, well, wait a second, you've alleged that this CPA prepared these tax returns falsely and fraudulently, and yet your expert can't point out a single example? What are we doing here? And then the 4th charge, being a conspiracy charge, the IRS special agent, Sean Breslin, who criminally investigated me, was put up on the witness stand. I actually used to I worked with Sean when I worked for the IRS. We were friends, and everything was great. And then he ended up being the special agent that investigated me. And he was put up on the witness stand, and of course, for the government, and his job was to point out the evidence of a conspiracy. But the problem for the government was that he could not testify to any evidence of a conspiracy. And on cross-examination, my attorneys directly asked him about any evidence that he encountered during his investigation of a conspiracy. And he couldn't testify to any evidence of a conspiracy. So again, I learned later from the jury, who I spoke to, wait a second, we're here because you say that this Banister guy, conspired with a client to defraud the United States. But you can't show us any evidence of fraud, and you can't show us any evidence of conspiracy. So what are we doing here? So the jury, there was actually a videotape that became a pivotal part of the case. Al Thompson, my client, when the IRS agents came to talk to him, as is, typical in a criminal investigation, he gave a videotape of a speech that I had given to all of his workers at his business. And this videotape was I forget, it was like 90 minutes or 100, a couple hours long. And it was me giving, a sincere explanation to Al Thompson's workers about my investigation of the federal income tax. And that tape ended up being what the government tried to claim was like the smoking gun. Here we have Banister, caught in the act on this videotape. And actually, the jury had the exact opposite reaction to the tape. The jury, as I, again, found out later when talking to the jurors, that they were actually viewing the videotape as evidence of my sincerity, as evidence of my diligence in determining what the truth was about the federal income tax. So that, Exhibit A, so to speak, that the government had kind of blew up in their face. So when the jury went out to deliberate, they deliberated for quite a long time. And typically, when the jury comes back quickly, that can typically mean there might be a guilty verdict that's coming. But the jury did not come back quickly. And when they finally came back with a verdict, the verdict was not guilty on all 4 charges. And of course, I've always maintained those were deserved acquittals because, as I described, the entire trial, the charges themselves were outrageous. They had, what is the government doing when they bring charges that they can't prove in a court of law? They have every opportunity with the investigation lasted for like 3 years before I was indicted in 2004. And after 3 years of peering into my life, they couldn't find any evidence of wrongdoing, yet they indicted me anyway. So, it was absolutely a deserved acquittal. And the jurors, a couple of them actually were willing to appear on camera. And so we interviewed the jurors after the trial. And you could even see you and me, or, at least you in the video, no white hairs at all, just like me, didn't have any white hairs at the time.
Right.
Just with our jaws feeling like they're dropping, right, as the jurors explain how ridiculous the government's case against me was. And so, and actually those 2 jurors both worked for the federal and state governments. The gentleman with the beard he used to work for the Department of Energy. And he told how, I don't think he told on tape, but he told me that he had looked at regulations for the Department of Energy, just like I looked at and included Department of Treasury regulations in the tax returns that I prepared. So that particular juror thought it was quite expected and appropriate for me to reference federal regulations in the tax returns that I prepared. And then the other juror that didn't have a beard, Oscar, he was formerly, I believe he was the president of a community college in the South San Francisco Bay Area called De Anza College. And he was, I believe he was also a member of the ACLU.
Wow.
And so, someone could think, gosh, somebody like that is going to convict me in a heartbeat, and they're not going to listen, to the defense's evidence. But it couldn't have been farther from the truth. Oscar, said, look, I could tell that you believe in what you're doing, and you believe and you were sincere, and you did your homework. And so, that's why I voted to acquit you. And I actually kept in touch with Oscar for many years after my 2005 trial. Very, very nice man. I think probably even if he had convicted me, I could still consider him a nice man. They took their jury duty seriously, and that's really, have to commend them for doing that, regardless of the verdict that they rendered.
Yeah.
So after I was acquitted and we interviewed the jurors, I came back to the hotel, and the hotel had a bill for all of the time that we spent there, like I think nearly a week, and the whole defense team and, all the meals and everything had to be just put to my room. And the bill ended up being, and again, this is in 2005 dollars, about $30,000. And I didn't have $30,000 to pay the hotel bill. And I don't recall, maybe you can fill in the blanks, Paymon, of how you learned that I had a $30,000 bill, but you paid it. And, I was on cloud nine, having been deservedly acquitted of these ridiculous charges, but it was certainly a difficult pill to swallow to get back to the hotel and think, okay, well, I know my wife and family and everyone's really happy that I was acquitted, but we're going to cough up 30 grand to pay this hotel bill. But you came through and paid it and gave us a huge sigh of relief.
Well, that was really not my money. That was the money of our students. They joined our Royal Freedom Package, which was the forerunner of our Restore Freedom Plan, that we come as Americans together to restore freedom in America like the America's founding fathers came together, but we do it non-violently, and so we contribute to that. We put not our lives on the line, but just a little bit of our fortune that we would have otherwise given to the IRS anyways. We put a little bit of that toward in this Restore Freedom Plan, and so it was meant to be for our students in case they get criminally charged that were part of the program. Well, you were never officially part of the program per se, but you always were very helpful to Freedom Law School and to get the word out there. So I thought, well, I can, it's only fair to help you back. Would you help us grow by speaking the truth and toward helping you? So I was glad to do that, Joe. That was something that I was very happy to do because, at the movement, one thing there's not enough of sometimes is people working together. Too often people want to go this direction or that direction and don't look for ways how they could work together rather than being separate, working together. So you've always been a team player. In fact, I can tell everybody that I used to have annual Freedom Leadership Conferences from 1999 forward, where I would bring all the top leaders of the freedom movements out there together annually to get together and talk and learn and strategize together despite whatever differences we might have, like the Founding Fathers had differences with each other. Even though they had that, they came together. So the first one, I think, was like you, Irvin Schiff, Steve Hempfling, Sean O'Connor, Dave Wellington, Bill Conklin. We had, some of the names I don't remember now. We had Larry B. Kraft, Attorney Larry B. Kraft, and Tom Cryer, and be there sometimes. Peter Gibbons was there at different times. So, you're very helpful in that, getting us going. Well, Joe, let me end this by this. Let's end the part of your situation. After that, have you filed any tax returns, 10 for income tax confession forms with the IRS since? And what has been the response to the IRS to you filing or not filing?
Well, 1998 was the last federal, Form 1040 that I filed, last federal tax return. And I didn't, as I mentioned, I hadn't filed up until the time I was indicted in 2004. And then 2004 through 2010 did not file. And it's not about civil disobedience. It's, I literally, former CPA, IRS trained. I use all of my abilities to determine, do I have a filing requirement in the Internal Revenue Code?
You mean you actually use the Bible of the IRS, the Internal Revenue Code, the laws, the U.S. Constitution, to follow to the T as best as you can, and you found no law requiring you to file a 1040 based upon the federal tax law. So you haven't filed a tax return since that time?
Right. And, as I said in previous episodes, I obviously bent over backwards while I was an IRS special agent and afterwards to try to get answers. And I've had nothing but sincerity, for the last 26 years, and the track record of the IRS and DOJ is the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I put up my reputation against the IRS as any day of the week. But indeed, in 2010, so after I had already been out of the IRS for 11 years, the IRS started a second criminal investigation against me.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike the first criminal investigation that led to that trial, the second one actually focused on the fact that by that time, it had been approximately 10 or 11 years that I had not filed a tax return. And I did a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request, and received a response. And the response showed me that in and around 2010, I was actually put under second criminal investigation. And then after, I believe it was around 7 months, that investigation was terminated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very, very much unusual, very unprecedented, because the FOIA response indicated that investigation was called a subject criminal investigation, or SCI is the acronym. And when the IRS starts an SCI, subject criminal investigation, the intention is to take that to prosecution. So for an SCI to be terminated is, quite unusual. And that's what happened in that second criminal investigation against targeting me. It was terminated, yet, as the documents show, hundreds of hours were invested in that second criminal investigation, and yet it was terminated. So that was 2010, 2011, and then here we are in 2026, and not one of those years since 1998, have I filed a federal tax return.
And Joe, I believe one reason they don't do that is because they know you will be able to go to the jury if they do charge you for not having filed 10 for income tax confession forms, and tell them your story, show them your book, Investigating the Federal Income Tax. Okay? It's not a page report. You get to show them your letter to IRS Commissioner Rosati to why you want to investigate the fraud of the IRS that you found out. And the response that they gave you that, just take a hike, we're not going to respond to you. And your response back resignation letter, and your continual attempts to have a civil debate with the government about all this, and they ignore you. I think the jury, would see that. They know they would see that because you have a right to talk about why you stopped filing 10 for income tax slavery confession forms. And they don't want to do that. They don't want to give the person the opportunity to show the law something real and reasonable why you stopped filing 10 for income tax confession slavery forms. So the petitions that we do at Freedom Law School, folks, are basically, they serve two functions. One, they, like Joe did, you try to bring about positive change in the government, changing behavior, following the law. Joe did that with the IRS. What are you going to do with the Congress? Congress is the one that has the power, over the IRS anyways. And at the same time, it shows your good intent to try to get clarity on whether you're wrong or right about you not having to file and pay federal income tax. And having done that, have a record of that, it's something that the jury will have to acquit you because your good intent is clearly shown and they have to vote not guilty. That's why I believe Joe never came after you. Well, Joel, thank you very much for being with us, my friend. Really appreciate you being out there. And by the way, we're going to add on here at the end a little clip of Joe being interviewed by Marjorie Taylor Greene, former Congresswoman from Georgia. Okay, that happened in April of 2026. You guys want to watch that video? Of course, Joe, we forgot to give you a website. We should give it every time. If you give me your website, because that interview and other interviews of you and information you got on your wonderful website, I encourage everybody to go check it out. How they can find out more about you, your website, and your information, Joe?
Thank you. Agentfortruth.com and agentfortruth.info would be the websites.
Agentfortruth.com and agentfortruth.info, correct?
Yes.
All right. Well, Joe, thank you very much for being with me. I really appreciate that. Folks, we'll say goodbye to Joe, and I'm going to get to your questions. You have a lot of people waiting to get the questions.